Well, good afternoon, all. I do want to thank Secretary Mattis, State Councilor Yang Chai-ji, and PLA Chief of Joint Staff Feng Feng Wei for a day of very productive meetings. Secretary Mattis and I were quite pleased to host the first session of the Diplomatic Security Dialogue since we agreed on this format at the Presidential Summit at Mar-a-Lago. This is one of 4 distinct dialogue areas that will implement our President's vision for constructive, results-oriented bilateral relations. We're sustaining these regular talks at a much higher level than in previous years and among principals in both the civilian and the military agencies. President Trump, I know, looks forward to his state visit to China later this year. As we've said before, U.S. and China relations have undergone a profound transformation over the past 40 years. These dialogues provide an opportunity to consider how we're going to engage and how we're going to live with one another over the next 40 years. In furthering this relationship, we need to work to expand areas of cooperation, as we did today, on issues where we have shared security interests. But we also need to address directly and very frankly areas where we face threats or areas where we have differences so that we can narrow these differences and solve the problems. The most acute threat in the region today is posed by the DPRK. We both call for complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And we call on the DPRK to halt its illegal nuclear weapons program and its ballistic missile test as stipulated in the UN Security Council resolutions. We reaffirmed our commitment to implement in full all relevant UN Security Council resolutions. For example, we both agreed that our companies should not do business with any UN-designated North Korean entities in accordance with these resolutions. China understands that the United States regards North Korea as our top security threat. We reiterated to China that they have a diplomatic responsibility to exert much greater economic and diplomatic pressure on the regime if they want to prevent further escalation in the region. Whether it is money laundering, extorting Korean expatriates, or malicious cyber activity, North Korea has engaged in a number of criminal enterprises that help fund its weapons programs. We must step up our efforts to help to curtail these sources of revenue. Countries around the world and in the UN Security Council are joining in this effort, and we hope China will do their part as well. The United States remains committed to building North Korea, is committed to holding North Korea accountable for multiple violations of UN Security Council resolutions which expressly prohibit its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. We regret that it is the North Korean people who suffer when the regime diverts resources to these prohibited programs, and we urge the DPRK regime to choose a better path for its people. We also had a frank exchange of views on the South China Sea. Secretary Mattis and I were clear that the U.S. position remains unchanged. We oppose changes to the status quo of the past through the militarization of outposts in the South China Sea and excessive maritime claims unsupported by international law, and we uphold the freedom of navigation and overflight. With that said, China has committed to resolve their disputes peacefully and in accordance with recognized principles of international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. During the dialogue, we also decided to adopt greater coordination to face the global threat posed by terrorism. We will be looking to China to help the Iraqi government in specific, meaningful ways to ensure the country's long-term stability and economic growth as it battles ISIS and begins its long process of rebuilding. An important part of our discussion about the next 40 years was increasing mutual trust and working toward a long-term risk reduction effort between our two militaries and our government. Building on what we've done in the air and maritime spaces, U.S. and Chinese civilian and military teams start discussions in new areas of strategic concern like space, cyberspace, nuclear forces, and nonproliferation issues. We need to enhance stability and develop strong international standards in these areas, and we need China to play a major role. Lastly, we discussed how this administration will stand up for American and universal values like human rights. We will not be shy about raising our concerns about China's human rights record, and I was direct and candid in our meetings today. Talk is not enough when it comes to increasing cooperation and narrowing differences between our two sides. The action items we have agreed upon today have set a foundation for additional areas of cooperation, and we look forward to our next interaction at this level and between our two presidents.